Hello, everyone. Happy first day of summer. Welcome to a tribute. Well, not a tribute. A reflection on last night's event, Thursday night. I went to the Commodore Ballroom to the athletics presentation. It's really hard to call it a presentation, but just an overall a night of a tribute to the late, great Jason Botchford, of course, passed away earlier on this year. It was a wonderful event that I wanted to just go through and kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that were talked about, and kind of get to tell you a little bit about the vibe and the feeling that was going on in the room. There was almost 1,000 people there at the Commodore Ballroom, which I think says to me that just really the relationship that Jason Botchford had with the Canuck fan base. There's an old cliche saying out there about some wanting to be for the voiceless. And I feel like Jason Botchford was a voice, the voice, whatever you would prefer, to the Vancouver Canuck fan base. I was thinking about this a little bit last night, and I don't think that there is a media base here in Canada anyway that I can think of that had a specific person like a Jason Botchford represent the fan base or love the fan base as much as Botchford did. And I think that it was certainly reflected in last night with the tributes and the conversation and how people were feeling about him and kind of the talk about that. So we'll go through, I just wanted to go through some of the things that were talked about a little bit last night, some of the things that were mentioned, and not like, and there's nothing here to criticize, so don't expect me to be critical or anything like that, but just kind of just give my perspective on the event and what happened there. As I said, it was pretty close to sold out. I think that they said that the amount of people there were about 800 people. So packed room, lots of jokes about the male washroom at the Commodore Ballroom being more busy than the female washroom, which was very rare at the Commodore. But really well organized. They had a silent auction, which a bunch of things, including Bro Do Your Deek shirts and some other stuff as well. Larry Walker donated a jersey. I think there was a Vlad Guerrero jersey. There was also an auction for an Elias Paterson hockey stick, which Jason Bruff said looked like a Kyle Wellwood stick, and a Vancouver Canucks jersey, autographed by all of the players, and a hot tub ended up being auctioned off as well. So a couple of some prizes were won. Great. There was some really good comedy from John Cullen and Ivan. Make sure that Ivan Decker and John Cullen were comedians there, and I thought they did a nice job. And of course, the music was DJ J Swing, and the Matinee had a 20-minute set as well. But the night started with, of course, Mike Halford and Jason Bruff of the Halford Bruff Show opened the show and opened the night. And basically, it started with a standing ovation for Jason Botchford. It was a pretty... I didn't time it, but I'm guessing looking back now, it was about a 3 to 5 minute standing ovation. And again, I just think it just really showed the impact and the relationship that Jason Botchford had with the Vancouver Canuck fan base, and the admiration and the thank you and just what he had to say and how he said it. And that will come up in a number of different a number of different ways that we'll go through this tonight. But it really just, to me, to start off with a standing ovation for Jason Botchford, I think was quite a way and quite a moving way for the fan base just to simply say thank you. And then Jason's wife, Kat, and brother Derek were on the stage, and Kat basically told the story of their move here to Vancouver. It was a 3-month contract, and they took the chance. And the line that I will remember is, and she said, it was someone, I think it was her niece or nephew, I'm sorry, I can't remember, but she said someone asked if Jason was as famous as Taylor Swift, and she said no, but he's made more of an impact than Taylor Swift ever would, and we got a really nice round of applause, and of course the thank yous to the audience, and thank yous to the Vancouver Canucks and TSN, and all that were involved at that point in time. We got the comedy, which was funny. We got into then there was the auction as well, and that happened as well. But then we got to the panels, and there were 2 panels, and that's where I want to spend most of my time on here. There was the Vancouver Canuck panel, which include, of course, Mike Halford and Jason Brough, Ray Ferarro, Jeff Paterson, and Harman, Dayal, the boy genius from The Athletic. And again, I think that one of the things that I think is quite fascinating, and you sort of heard that and observed that even from some of the people that were not from Vancouver, is just the ovation that Jeff Paterson and Ray Ferarro especially got. Just kind of, it's a fascinating relationship and respect that I think the Canuck fan base has developed with the media representatives here. One of the questions that was asked was about just their memories of Jason Botchford. There was a lot of time spent with this panel. Some talk about the Canucks, but a lot of talk about Jason Botchford and sort of their memories. Jason Brough talked about trying to get things into the Athletes and the Provies. Ray Ferraro talked about a time that he had a fight with Jason Botchford on air, and they had a dispute, and he was a little nervous about it, and then he kind of called the Botchford after, and Botchford's like, yeah, and no problem, and sort of just the element of, being, pardon the pun here, having the ability to agree to disagree, have your passionate argument, have your passionate debate, and still be respectful at the end of the day. And that's, I think, something that Jason Botchford brought to the table. And I also think there was a lot of conversation about how Jason Botchford was not willing to back down or was well-researched and stood his ground. And we'll talk about that a little bit later with a famous exchange between himself and Pierre LeBrun that Pierre LeBrun shared about as well. And then Harman Dayal of The Athletic talked a little bit about just the importance of, refreshing about the Athletes and the Provies, even if it was 1 o'clock in the morning. That, for those that don't know, that those that don't follow the Canucks on a regular basis, one of the things that became so important in Canuck Nation was the Provies and the Athletes that Jason Botchford had. Lots of talk over the past month about, from even media members like Blake Price and other media members, that, before, to make sure that they were on the same page as Jason Botchford, they would make sure that they would listen and read the Provies or what became known as the Athletes, to make sure that they were on the same page as Jason Botchford. That's how much clout isn't even the right word, how much influence that Jason Botchford had on even not only the fan base, but the media as well. He was just a presence in the Vancouver media, and it was neat to hear that as well. And then you had J-Pat, and, if there's a guy there's a number of people to feel compassion for here, family, and workmates, but just the close developmentness that Jeff Paterson and Jason Botchford had with the Pat cast and their relationship traveling on the road, and Jeff mentioning that it's not going to be the same this year. And he's going to go through all these cities that he's traveled on and have all these memories of Jason Botchford. It's going to be really tough on J-Pat. I was thinking about how that's going to be a challenge for him going into this next season that I was just thinking about and felt for. And he mentioned it too. It's not going to be the same traveling around for him this year, traveling and covering the Canucks. We talked about a couple of stories here. He talked about when Jay Beagle made his return from Washington for the return night. And Beagle had like 25 games with Vancouver, nothing spectacular, nothing out of the ordinary, but they just followed and watched Beagle's, respect. Like there was a media thing, and all of this stuff happened, and kind of just sort of, in a sense, just the Paterson-Botchford relationship that like other people had. They were trying to make each other laugh, and they were laughing, and there was a standing ovation at the end there for Jay Beagle from the fan base, and there was a guy that was sitting near them that did sort of the Rocky pose, kind of went, yeah! And Paterson took a picture of it, and just to irritate Botchford, he would always send a text of that picture. So just really kind of the playful, fun relationship that Paterson had. And Halford talked about how he still misses him to this day and how fun it's been. There was Canuck talk here as well. But before we do that, one of the things that has come up as well is how the Vancouver Canucks should or can honor Jason Botchford going forward. And Jeff Paterson made a really good point at this point where he talked a little bit about sort of the separation between Botchford, who was not part of the organization. He was covering the organization, and there has to be some sort of careful separation of that. So he's not for a decal, and he understands why people want to honor him, and he hopes to kind of understand that, but there has to be a way to do that is not, he's not part of the organization. So, and that was a really important thing that I thought to clear up some things there, where the Vancouver Canucks can, and where Jason Botchford would be comfortable with going as well in the Botchford family. So I know that there's a number of people that want to see some sort of honor, but I think from what I took away from what Jeff Paterson says is there's still some things to discuss about where exactly that would fit. As far as the Canuck conversation, some of the things that came up, it was a lot of the typical things that in the Vancouver Canuck fan base has been talking about. But the thing that one question was asked is, what is the one thing that Canucks cannot do? And Jeff Paterson answered brilliantly because, and it says, hire Peter Chiarelli, which got a huge cheer from the audience. If you don't know, there are reports and rumors that the Vancouver Canucks have been talking to Peter Chiarelli about a role within the organization. I first looked at that and thought that was someone trolling. I thought that, but actually this is serious. This is not trolling. This is apparently there is some bite to that conversation. So we'll have to see, but we'll get into that a little bit later because there was a question on the NHL panel as well. There was talk about weaponizing cap space, which Harlan brought up the idea of, or Harman, not Harlan, Harman Dayal brought up the idea, which he's brought up before, of bringing in bringing a guy like Patrick Marleau as an idea to acquire him and buy him out, and that just been the whole struggle in the conversation about how the Vancouver Canucks weaponize their cap space. That came very clear there as a conversation. Ray Ferarro pointed out, because someone asked what, and one of the famous Jason Botchford lines was, "We need an army," and Ferarro pointed out how far the Canucks are from the Bruins and the Blues at this point in time, and and he also asked, "What if I sat four of you down and asked you what the Vancouver Canucks identity would be? Would I get the same answer? Probably not." So there was a lot of work there. Some talk about drafting ideas. Some talk about who they're acquiring for trade. The question came up between Gospisar and Ristolainen. Ferarro suggested that Gospisar would be a cheaper and better option for the Canucks over Ristolainen, feeling that Ristolainen has been overused but would require about three players. Bruff asked, and so Hutton, Goldobin, and a fifth-round pick. And Ferraro answered, "Well, you're wrong on all three on that." So a lot of it was a bit of the same conversation that we all had, but I think what was really great about that too was there was a lot of memories about Jason Botchford and what Botchford meant to the fan base. One guy asked, why is it taking, what's it going to take to win? And there's only me and one other guy that really cares about this team winning. And then Paterson responded, well, there was one other guy that wanted to win as well, and that was Botchford, and that got a cheer as well. So really great panel, really great entertaining, just a really cool moment there. To hear a little bit from the Canuck perspective. And then it was the hockey panel, the NHL panel, which included Pierre, LeBrun, Bob McKenzie, James Duthie, James Mirtle, and hosted by and moderated by Craig Custance from The Athletic. Pierre LeBrun was absolutely hilarious. I know that he comes across on maybe your radio station or your TV station as a very straight-laced guy. He reminds me, if you're a wrestler watching a wrestling of Kevin Owens, sort of this, really played to the audience. He kind of was a bit of a wrestling heel. We'll get into a couple of the things that he said that the fans didn't like, but he was absolutely hilarious and had some of the lines of the night. And, of course, Duthie and McKenzie as well. They all shared their stories. This is where Bob McKenzie admitted that him and Botchford actually didn't get along at first. They almost got to blows. But as part of media, everyone learns to respect each other. And Jason Mirtle talked about the process of hiring Botchford. And there's Halford and Bruff saying that they need to hire a guy like Jason Botchford, and they need more Jason Botchfords at The Athletic. But the discovery is that there was only one Jason Botchford. So that process took about 6 to 7 months, but they were able to get Jason Botchford on board. Duthie talked a little bit about Botchford. Pierre LeBrun talked about his time because he's well known towards Joe Thornton, him and Joe Thornton. He knows Joe Thornton really well. And, of course, there's the famous conversation that Jason Botchford and Joe Thornton had, or interview that Jason Botchford did with Joe Thornton regarding a quote that Thornton said that was supposed to be kind of off the record. But it was back in 2013. Thornton quoted that, or Botchford quoted Thornton, of course, about a goal celebration if he scored 4 goals, about basically going on the ice and masturbating. And Pierre LeBrun was a little upset about that, and they were doing the That's Hockey panel at the time, and they got into a pretty passionate argument about it. But what LeBrun admired about Jason Botchford was that he would not. Despite the fact that he faced a lot of criticism for that, and that was true, he caused quite a stir with reporting that. He didn't back down from it. He stood his ground on deciding to report on that. And that gained Pierre LeBrun's respect as well. So that was really fascinating to hear. One of the questions that I was kind of curious about, that I didn't ask any questions, but one of the questions I wanted to know, though, and I'm going to wonder about is the process of how Botchford gets into the Hall of Fame. Does that happen this year? Does that wait? How does that work? So I'm going to be curious about that going forward. Now, there was more talk about Canuck and NHL conversations here, so there were some really interesting questions, I thought, on this, and we'll get to some of them here. Once I pull up the notes. And Duthie talked a little bit about his time dealing with Botchford asking serious hockey questions, and he had to text Bob McKenzie jokingly because he didn't always watch the games. Then he was talking about the time on the morning show before Botchford, which was Jake and Dave Pratt. And Pratt got booed a little bit there, but Botchford asked some really good questions. There was then talk about, the question about if the Vancouver Canucks can move up in the draft. And Bob McKenzie reminded everyone that it's actually really tough to move up on the draft. There's lots of talk about it, but at the end of the day, it's not easy to do. He ended up predicting that Bo and Byram would end up in Colorado. So that's that's hence why we're hearing the Tyson Barrie trade talk, I would imagine. That's part of it. LeBrun also said he has not heard any Brandon Sutter trade rumors, which caused a big boo and sigh, but he hasn't heard Brandon Sutter's name. That doesn't mean he can't not be traded, but LeBrun has not heard that happen. And there was conversation about Peter Chiarelli, and LeBrun said yes, that there's lots of teams that are talking to Peter Chiarelli. He also said they can't justify any of the trades that Peter Chiarelli did, but he did point out that he did sign Leon Draisaitl to a really good contract. And of course, Chiarelli deserved to be fired at Edmonton, but the hockey community is a close-knit community, and he can see Peter Chiarelli getting a job. He didn't say that Peter Chiarelli would end up in Vancouver, but he did talk about how he could get a job. Then a guy asked if this did not go over very well, but a guy suggested that one of the biggest mistakes that the Canucks ever made was not trading the Sedins, which got a huge boom in the crowd. And Duthie said, maybe you need someone as cutthroat as someone like you to make a move like that. But the fact is the influence that they had on the community, it would have been really hard to trade the Sedins. So was not in the cards there, and the crowd cheered there. Pierre LeBrun was great here. He says, "You're from Calgary, aren't you?" Which was, I thought, got a pretty good crowd. Pierre LeBrun also thought that the movement in this draft would probably be between numbers 15 to 31. You could see a lot of movement there because there's a lot of players around the same range, so he could see movement there. And James Duthie was also asked who's the favorite person he interviewed GM. He said it was Brian Burke, and Burke wasn't as mean as he portrayed himself to be. He was a lot of fun to interview. There was talk about Ryan Callahan as well. And of course, he's going on long-term injured reserve because of injury that he's basically not going to be able to play hockey again. And the question is how can you hide someone like that all of a sudden has and I'm using air quotes here, an injury. Callahan, of course, diagnosed with a degenerative back disease, and Custance pointed out that he was following Tampa Bay general manager Julian Brisebois and asked about weaponizing the cap space and what that does to the cap. And Brisebois stopped him and said, "This is a hockey player that has a disease. He's never going to play again." And that caused a little bit of people to kind of think a little bit about what this is about. Yes, that, we can talk about cap space, we can talk about cap room, we can talk about all of that, but that doesn't mean that there's not a human being at the end of the day here, which kind of stopped a little bit of people about that conversation. Then McKenzie pointed out that it's the ramification around long term can be good, but there's also can be problematic for teams as well. So that's not necessarily like, hiding this cap space isn't necessarily a big thing. And then there was a reminder from Pierre LeBrun, who, the guy was not trying to be popular. He was just trying to stay fast. So he's like, that's the big question about Roberto Luongo. And if he decides to retire, that's going to hurt the Canucks salary cap going forward, which of course had people talking as well. For those who don't know, if Roberto Luongo retires, the Canucks are on the hook with salary there. And that's, with the salary cap going down, that's not going to be great as well. Then Bob McKenzie said his favorite prospect of this draft was Alex Newhook, and he didn't make a prediction of who the Canucks would pick, but he did point out that Alex Newhook would be his favorite prospect. And of course, if you listen to our mock draft, I had Alex Newhook going 10 to the Vancouver Canucks, so we'll see what happened on that. Some of the other things that went on. Here, some other things that went on. Just pulling up here a couple of other quick good questions that happened. And I want to make sure that I got here. There was a question a little bit about Mitch Marner and if the Vancouver Canucks should get in on that, which got a boo from some people, not because they were talking about Marner to the Canucks, but the idea of a conversation around Toronto just was like, get back to Vancouver. Anyway, James Mirtle did not think that Marner would be offer sheeted. And then McKenzie pointed out, if you're going to put an offer sheet for Mitch Marner and he's getting 11, what exactly are you going to have to pay Paterson? And that's a great point, because Paterson is going to be a huge cost. And that came up a couple of times as well, the cost of what Paterson's going to be going forward. So that's really something that you have to kind of think about a little bit there as well. And then there was a talk. Someone also asked if Elias Pettersson's better than Austin Matthews. And of course, the answer to that was we'll see. But again, it kind of went into some Leaf talk, which didn't excite a lot of the Canuck fan base in the crowd. But and then there was an asked about a captaincy, because of course there is some speculation that at the draft today that the Canucks will reveal that Bo Horvat will be the official captain of the Vancouver Canucks. And he was asked if Bob McKenzie was asked if the importance of a captaincy. He suggested that it's overrated. He doesn't think it's necessarily, a need to have one guy with a C. He thinks it happens more organically, that team leadership is more that way. And then LeBrun answered by saying, basically, what I wouldn't do, one thing I wouldn't do, and he kind of started with a real conversational thing, is one thing I wouldn't do is put the captaincy on a goalie, which really got the boo for the crowd. Of course, as a few years ago, Roberto Luongo was wearing the captaincy in Vancouver, which caused quite a bit of controversy as well. So LeBrun, again, being great there. And then that was mostly pretty much it. It's just the other thing that came up was finally was kind of a weird way to end the questions, but was a Carolina guy asked about how great the Carolina Hurricanes are, that they went to the final this year, and of course LeBrun reminded them they didn't win a game in the Eastern Conference. And the guy rushed up the stage for some in particular reason and then came back, it was just weird, kind of a weird way to end, but that's okay. Nothing really came of that. And then there was some talk about Boston, really, why is Boston whining? It really wasn't much of an answer there. But overall, I think everyone was there to pay tribute for Jason Botchford. Bunch of money was raised. Bunch of people had a great time. And I think overall, the tribute to Jason Botchford and just talking hockey and being in a really unique setting, getting an opportunity to sit to sit and listen to these guys in a very non-formatted way, just more organic way to listen to them talk and have a good time and just reflect on hockey and life and just have some fun. So just a great event. I was really glad to be there. Thank you to TSN and The Athletic and everyone for the organization of that. I think that really helped the Canucks fan base. I think allowed a lot of people to pay tribute to Jason Botchford. We still have a lot of other things coming up. Of course, we did the mock draft, which the draft is tonight. So checking that out before you're watching, we just did the first round, Sean, Tyler, and I. Heidi and I reviewed the NHL awards. Tyler and I are off to the draft tonight, and we will recap the draft and all of its goings-ons on recording a podcast Sunday before we send Tyler off to the airport. Follow me, KUVULE, KevinOlenek.com. Follow Sean, BeardyCanuck03, Tyler at T-Noble, and Heidi at Haida Baseball. We'll talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.